Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly workshop. We are UETH, the Decentralized University of Ethereum, a educational platform sponsored by the Ethereum community. We have some special guests today. First, we have Paul Schmidt, who is COO at fxhash, an open platform for artists and collectors to live out their passion for generative art. We also have a notable artist with us, Sara Baumann of Women and Weapons. Women and Weapons is a renowned connection of 10,000 diverse, beautiful, and badass women NFTs. In this session titled Digital Renaissance, the Impact of NFTs on the Art World, we will explore how NFTs democratize art, establish ownership, monetize creativity, and redefine art collecting. My name is Tina Dai, and I am your UETH host for today. I've been an early stage venture investor for the past 5 years, most recently focused on crypto. And prior to that, I got my career started in product as well as strategy consulting. So for the first part of the session, as always, we will start off with a talk from our expert, who is Paul tonight, and move into Q&A with Sara and Paul to dive deeper into the challenges, opportunities, and future trends that are shaping this digital renaissance. So for today, we are doing things a little bit differently since it's the holidays. We've pre-recorded the session for you. We've secured some questions from our community that we will ask during this conversation, but you will still get a chance to ask your questions. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in our general chat, and we can address your questions asynchronously. As always, at UETH, our intention is to inspire our students with real-life examples so that they can get into projects and learn by doing. So I challenge every one of you today to reflect on how you can make a tangible difference using the knowledge you'll gain, and perhaps start your own NFT project. For our first speaker tonight, we have Paul, who's the topic expert. Paul is a tech enthusiast and the COO of fxhash. Paul, I would love if you could give a quick 2-minute background of what inspired you to dive into the world of NFTs and Web3.
Hard question. I think essentially all of this started for me in 2019, or first in 2017, just reading about the first of not the first, but that was the first bull that I sort of saw from the outside looking in. Ultimately didn't buy stuff as I was just out of high school in that sense. Then sort of went on to studied banking and finance. Initially wanted to go into investment banking, soon found out that you're actually miserable when doing that. So searched for other things, found startups, somehow found my way into crypto, as I sort of thought it would be the next big thing. So people building, 20 years ago, people building everything within the internet, and 10 years ago, apps. And then sort of 2-3 years ago, mostly crypto. Now probably you can also add AI to that. So based off that, I took a deep dive, looked into things, didn't really like DeFi, didn't make much sense for me, but was always interested in arts and fashion. So quickly looked into sort of that section over there, what was actually happening there. Bought my first PFP on ETH, lost all of my money with it, but through that found Pesos and Ticketnunk and actually found a thriving art scene. Got introduced to generative art. And ultimately then sort of within the first days where fxhash has released, and I sort of just tried to be a part of it, sort of offered my help, was part of the moderation team, and then that just continued going and growing as sort of fxhash grew into the largest generative art repository that it is right now. And I think that's a very quick intro and overview of how I came into the space.
I love that story. I love that story because I think Sara also has some parallels in her story, but I'm really excited to have Sara here tonight as well. She's a really good friend that I've known since high school and artist of Women and Weapons. Sara, we will get into your origin story later during your part of the workshop, but we'll love to have you share a bit more about what inspired you to create Women and Weapons and what the collection means to you.
Yeah, so Women and Weapons was originally inspired by women of the 1940s through the 1960s. You want me to talk about this right now, right? Okay.
1 to 2 minutes.
Okay.
Maybe start at the top.
Okay. Women and Weapons was originally inspired by women, specifically women in the United States through the 1940s, the 1960s. That was often an era where women were not really perceived as powerful, or certainly not as powerful as they are. But it was also an era where a lot of women found their independence working in the war force and what have you, in factories, while men were gone at war. And I think this was a point where a lot of women found that interest in continuing to foster their independence. And so Women and Weapons originally started as a 10-piece art collection painted with gouache that was meant to portray these women from this era as powerful while utilizing this kind of World War II era or other war era weaponry as the symbols and the metaphors of the weapons women carry into their everyday. And this eventually transitioned into a 10,000-piece collection so that everybody could kind of have a piece of this artwork for themselves and utilize it as something that inspired them, empowered them, represented them, and what have you. And so that's basically the origin story of Women and Weapons.
Thank you for sharing that. We'll be hearing a lot more about the collection later, as well as Sarah's personal backgrounds. But now that the audience knows a bit more about you both, we would love to dive right into Paul's talk. So Paul will be presenting some slides, starting with the challenges creators face in traditional art, and share an introduction of how NFT technology benefits artists. He will also discuss various form factors of NFTs and deep dive more into his work at fxhash with generative art. So Paul, I'll bring you up and have you take it away.
Okay, hi, I'm Paul. I introduced myself like briefly ago, so I don't need to do that again. I'm part of fxhash. fxhash is an open platform for generative art. I'll first talk a little bit about the traditional art market and sort of like just to ease ourselves in. So mostly how art is getting consumed by the by the large I'll just start again. Mostly how art is consumed by the majority of the people is either by going to museums or going to galleries. Not actually all of the people consuming art actually buying art. The art market is dominated by physical art sales and like galleries, art fairs, and auction houses not really being accessible to a lot of people. If you go to a gallery, you might not even know sort of like if you are allowed to buy something, prices are not shown to you. It's all a very sort of like mysterious and complicated process to the outside looking in. Moreover, only few artists sort of like can actually make a living off their art. Sort of like not everybody that calls themselves an artist sort of like is considered to be an artist by the traditional art world. And I always think sort of like that might not be the best thing. So if you look at sort of like the evolution of NFTs and how they came in on the next slide, then sort of like it changes, especially in the like digital art context. So NFTs, for those that don't know, essentially a one-of-a-kind digital asset that is stored on a blockchain that emphasizes the authenticity, the scarcity at times, and also the ownership. Why is that so important, and why is that so important, especially in the context of digital art? Because it sort of makes sense, right? If you have a digital file, it's hard to sort of like prove ownership. If I have like the file, a PNG, and send it to a collector of mine via email, or then suddenly there are two files that are exactly the same. So how do you prove authenticity in the case of you wanting to sell it on? That is really where like NFTs and blockchain come in. If we go to the next slide, you can see that sort of like the first point, or like the first name we already talked about, and the two other sides are really like the smart contract and royalties, which I think, or we think, are quite important to know about. So smart contract, essentially enabling these automated transactions, or enabling an artist to, for example, upload an algorithm or upload like a PFP collection, and then automatically getting minted more with like each purchase, and also the smart contract ensuring that royalties are going to be paid in perpetually. So what are royalties? If I, as an artist, or for example, if you bought a Picasso painting like 100 years ago, might have been a little bit cheaper than they are now. However, if you would now go on and sell them on, you wouldn't have to pay money to like the estate of Picasso. You would receive all of the net gain in that sense. And that essentially is normal throughout the traditional art market. There are some rules in some countries, but mostly royalties are like capped at like 1%. So nothing really that an artist can live on. However, if royalties, which means essentially a part of all of the secondary sales, are enforced through smart contracts, then it means that on any sale that is happening, artists will receive money from it and will make an income. And that really is the case. And one of the biggest benefits of NFTs that royalties are mostly enforced. So first of all, NFTs enable artists to sell their work, especially digital artists, as it's an inherently digital good that is getting sold. So therefore, the proof of ownership and proof of authenticity should also be inherently digital. Additionally to that, the galleries and museums are not as important anymore. Artists can self-publish. Artists can publish on open platforms, artists like on fxhash or on curated platforms like Artblocks, for example, or Super Rare Foundation. There's a plethora of them that is available to them. And more often than not, NFTs and sort of like digital art also enable like digital art as a whole. Like all of our lives, well, not all of our lives, but I think like most of us are spending 6 to 8 to 10 days in front of some kind of screen right now. So if you think about it, if that is what we are spending half of our waking hours on, why is the contemporary art world not getting reflected in that? I would argue that it is, but only slowly coming up, and that generative art in that sense and digital art is sort of like the art movement of our era. The numbers in that sense also don't lie. We have seen like a steady increase in sales of NFTs, sales of digital art. One thing to consider there, I would decouple sort of like overall NFT sales from like digital and generative art sales, as that at times can be quite hard. And if you really look at it at the art context side of things, then I think right now digital art is roughly like 2 to 3% of like the overall art market, which is more or less always valued around like $60 to $70 billion in the last years. Exactly. So we've talked a little bit about NFTs. I talked mostly about generative, as that is sort of like what we at fxhash do, what I'm most versed in. But essentially, you can upload non-generative stuff, which is like your normal images. You can also upload your proof of authenticities of like physical artwork to the blockchain. That is also an NFT. And the NFT is not really the art in that sense. I mean, it never is. It's always just a proof. But the art is then living, or is essentially the physical one. Whereas for generative art, especially for on-chain generative art, the art mostly is an algorithm that is then sort of like where the NFT just either points to the real on-chain storage, or it points to sort of like the IPFS node where your algorithm is living on. So that's a little bit of an intro into NFTs as a whole. Now I'm just briefly talking about what we at fxhash actually do. So as Tina mentioned in my intro, we are an open platform for artists and collectors to live out their passion for generative art. We started in November of 21, initially on Tezos, as we wanted to build a truly open and global framework that allowed all artists to participate and also all collectors to participate without the sort of like need to pay $200 in gas, as that ultimately excludes a large majority of the global population. We bootstrapped for essentially 1.5 years before raising a round to sort of like continue to tackle that market. We are really trying to have exhibitions globally. We were lucky to be at Basel, Hong Kong, Basel, Paris, and Miami with Tezos, and also just now sort of like trying to tackle the Asian market a little bit more, as similar to the traditional art market, Asia is not really, does not really get the respect as it deserves, especially when we look at generative artists. There's a lot of great and amazing artists that might have it harder to sell to like the more westernized art global world in that sense, because of the language barriers, and also at times cultural barriers. And as sort of like an open platform and open framework, we try to change that. Below you just saw like some images, but essentially diving a little sort of like into computer generated art versus generative art. Previous to this, sort of like the artist wasn't really able to like have randomness. So like the artist had their own process. There wasn't really co-creation between the artist and the collector, and generative art allows for all of this to happen. So I, as an artist, obviously I can write my algorithm, but I can also give that algorithm sort of like to the collectors for them to play around. Obviously, they won't code, but I can give them options like redefine. So you can see here, this might look different than this. Sorry, it's like mirrored. And okay, I'll try it again. Okay, that's hard. You can see, for example, how this here on my left shoulder and that here on top of my right shoulder, the algorithm is the same. However, the outputs are different. And that's essentially generative art. So you have one algorithm being able to be outputted multiple times. And ultimately that gives you sort of like the randomness, chance, it gives you unpredictability, it gives sort of like a unique flavor. And you can also give the collectors the option to have some sort of co-creation. So for example, say, okay, maybe I don't like the pink, I like more of red. And then you sort of like as a collector have the influence on the artworks or the algorithm done by the artist. Next slide. Yeah, if you sort of like want to get into generative art, there's some great resources out there. I think Tina probably has linked them in the slide deck. One is the Generative Art Timeline done by Lerandom, which is sort of like a generative art institution / fund. Some say generative art has started more than 2,000 years ago. But I personally say that it mostly started sort of like in the early digital area, mostly sort of like when computers have been around, which was the 60s. So essentially since computers have been around, people have been trying to create art with code. And only recently, sort of like through the NFT era and through the possibility of being able to sell their artworks, they sort of like this whole genre has received like a huge uptick as now this market or this art market sort of like is getting financialized, and ultimately if more money comes in, then also more eyes are getting put on there. And then maybe to like close it off, just sort of like what we've been able to do or what we've been able to help our artists with. So artists have been able to in the last 2 years earn roughly, I think by now there's like 25 million euros, and the collectors sort of like earning 30 million euros on their secondary sales. Also, again, supporting the artist through sort of like the royalties, and more than 2.3 million artworks being sold, and roughly, I think, 45,000 users in that sense. That's sort of like NFTs in a nutshell, generative art as a little like deep dive, and sort of like what we do at fxhash.
Thank you so much for that, Paul. I've been a longtime supporter of fxhash, and I really love the vibrant community of artists that you have on the platform. I think one story I would love for you to share with the audience is the founding story of fxhash and sort of the grassroots movement of how it came to be. I think that's a really cool story to tell.
Sure. So I think I mentioned that briefly how we got started in November of 21. For those that have been in the crypto space during that time, ETH was still proof of work, meaning extremely high gas fees. And I think I said that before, sort of like doesn't allow for all artists to publish their art. Additionally, there was really only one platform out there that allowed for generative art to be published. There was Artblocks. Artblocks is an amazing platform. It curates drops in that sense and really puts like the best artists that are doing generative art, that puts them on a pedestal. But there's more artists than 12 a year in that sense, or 30 a year that sort of like want to showcase their art. So our founder is a generative artist himself, and he wanted to have a way for him to upload projects, and wanted a way for him to also like sell not only to like the US or Europe, but throughout the world. And Tezos had a different platform before that, Hikanunk, which was started by a Brazilian founder. So there was a really thriving artistic community already out there. So to us, Tezos was the perfect choice as the first blockchain to start fxhash. So Seifert, or Baptiste, with his first name, he essentially created the first version of fxhash, I think within like 3 to 4 weeks, funnily enough, with one broken hand. It's a common theme actually with our developers. There's always one person with like a hand injury for some reason. It's super weird. And he started that out. And I think within the first, we found like immediate product market fit. A lot of artists had for the first time in their life, had the option to release their art to a large audience. And I think within like the first 1 to 2 months, we had more than 2,000 collections already being uploaded, more than 10,000 collectors collecting on the site. And ultimately sort of like really kickstarted this open generative art renaissance that we're seeing right now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. So now we will have Sara share her story and her work with Women and Weapons. Sara already shed some light on her NFT collection, but would love to have her deep dive more into her perspective as an artist and talk about what Women and Weapons is, her roadmap for the community, and how she has involved as an independent artist with NFTs. So Sara, I'm going to bring you up and have you share more about your work.
Awesome. Sounds great. Thanks, Tina. So like Tina said, my name is Sara Baumann. I'm the founder of Women and Weapons, also the artist for Women and Weapons. And I'm also an independent artist. And my trajectory into art has been a very intriguing one.
Sorry, can we start that over?
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. Okay. Go for it.
All right. Thanks so much, Tina. I appreciate it. My name is Sara Baumann. I am the founder and artist for Women and Weapons, and I'm also an independent artist as well. So Women and Weapons, as I touched on earlier, was essentially born from a 10-piece gouache painted collection that was meant to portray these women from the 1940s through the 1960s as the powerful women that they are, but also utilizing this imagery as the metaphors and the symbols of the weapons that women bring into their everyday, whether that be their empathy or their strategy or their artistic skill or whatever it might be. And it's essentially gone on to build, I think, an incredibly strong community of individuals, as well as people who quite literally have utilized this imagery as their own sort of personal Rosie the Riveter, something that they can either use to represent themselves or something that empowers them or reminds them of somebody that they love. And so it's been very wonderful to watch our community blossom and grow and see how people have wanted to continue to utilize the artwork. So art and community, like I mentioned before, our community has really grown into a network of people who have come to love one another. A lot of people, I think funneled into Discord, post that COVID era where everybody was kind of online seeking those social relationships. And as a result, we've built a strong network of friendships that we've been able to kind of meet up with one another around the globe at these various conferences and what have you. One of our credos at Women and Weapons is essentially to do good in the world. And so our community has not only been able to mobilize by assisting one another, supporting one another, and being there for one another, but also doing good in the globe itself. We donated a portion of our primary sales as well as our secondary sales to the Malala Fund, because one of the things that we believe at Women and Weapons is that education can be a woman's weapon. And so I think to date, we've donated around $178,000 to the Malala Fund, which it's a organization that helps change the educational systems in areas that oftentimes education is not attainable for young girls and women, and really attacks the grassroots ecosystem in those locations so that girls are able to gain that education. And so we've explored a few different things like real world experiences. We've been at VCon's NFT land. We've done some idea exploration for bringing our characters to life, whether that be our community's utilization of the IP as their identities. For example, Girl in the Verse uses her Women and Weapons as her digital identity for her brand. We've had people utilize the IP for products, whether it be like BPI Sports, who used it for their Shuriken power. And then also we've created a digital influencer named Nova, who's based off of one of our season 2 characters. We saw a bit of a rise of digital influencers over the last few years. And one of the things that we wanted to do with Women and Weapons was storytell a little bit, and hence the ignition of Nova into the ecosystem, who is a 23-year-old influencer that's come from the 1960s, basically catapulted into 2023, and tries to figure out how to make it as an influencer in 2023 in this kind of new ecosystem that she's in. But predominantly, one of the things that we focus on at Women and Weapons is community and artwork. And as well, my work as an independent artist, what's pictured here is my heritage collection, which is a collection that touches on my heritage being Iranian and celebrates the women and the people in Iran who, since 1979 have really kind of had their basic freedoms ripped away from them. And people in Iran have really been fighting hard since the 70s, trying to regain those freedoms. And oftentimes throughout the media, Iranian people and our culture is not generally favorably portrayed. And through this set of artworks, I'm hoping to change the narrative and allow people to see a glimpse into what I see of my culture, which is beauty and warmth and power and strength and people fighting for those freedoms. Similar to what I did with Women and Weapons, one of the great reasons for creating Women and Weapons was to create a dialogue that allowed people to kind of change what our cultural norms were, because I truly believe that a lot of change can come from, open-minded conversation with one another. And this is a reason for why I also created the Heritage Collection, which is something that I also have. As you can see, these are on canvases. They're 36-inch by 48-inch canvases, but they have a digital twin via an NFT. So the blockchain is kind of acting as that authenticator, essentially, for these original artworks. And that top piece with the red background actually just sold not too long ago. And so the person who gets that piece not only gets the physical canvas, but they also get the NFT that's associated, which essentially works as the authentication for this piece.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I would love to now just have a dialogue with you, because one thing we didn't really touch on is your background, right? I would love to hear how you, I know you've always been passionate about art since high school, and even beyond that, earlier than that. And we'd love to hear what you were doing before you moved into NFTs and how you got inspired to move into NFTs.
Yeah, I feel like Web3 has kind of been a bit of a great awakening for a lot of people who have shifted careers into this Web3 or NFT ecosystem. And that was very much the case for me. Like you said, I've been passionate about art since the moment I could pick up a crayon, essentially. But I ended up actually going into healthcare and worked as an acute care occupational therapist for about 5 years, worked through COVID, got insanely burnt out. And in 2021, my husband started delving into the NFT space and kept kind of hint, nudging me that this was something that I really needed to pay attention to as an artist, that this was a very unique situation that was occurring over in the NFT sphere and something that potentially could change the lives of many artists. So I started to delve down the rabbit hole, explore on, at the time, Twitter, and also Discord, what the community was all about and what this, secondary royalties, what that royalties in perpetuity meant for artists, but also having our artwork on the blockchain. And after the sale of my 10 original artworks, which Gary Vaynerchuk was actually one of my first collectors, which was a wild experience. And then the sellout of my 10,000 piece Women and Weapons collection, I quit working at the hospital full time in January, 3 months after we minted out, and have thankfully been able to focus full time on being a founder and being an artist ever since then. And so this is a story that's not just unique to me, but a story that's unique to, I think, a lot of people that are within the Web3 and the NFT ecosystems, specifically because of the kind of life-altering opportunities that blockchain and NFTs and Web3 related art offer to people that the traditional art scene does not necessarily offer to a lot of artists.
Can you actually expand more on that? Like, why, can you compare and contrast in Web2? Like, why wouldn't this have been possible for you as an artist, right? Because you are the talent, and you are creating, now physical pieces of work as well. But what about Web3 makes it easier for you to monetize and get an audience?
Yeah, Paul kind of touched a little bit on that earlier, in that, at one point in time, we were very much reliant on these gallery systems, right, to get our artwork out into the world. And then came the surgence of social media, as well as sites like Etsy, where, a lot of artists were able to kind of get their artwork in front of more eyes, not as much reliant on galleries. but there's a lot of kind of oppressive terms in association with selling your artwork through a gallery. Oftentimes galleries take about 50% of whatever your profits are. But similar to a lot of these art fairs as well, oftentimes you'll see that the artist has to pay almost $2,000 for a booth, and then the fair also gets a percentage of their sales as well. And that even can go on months past the end of that fair that was hosted. And so what Web3 and NFTs and the blockchain really offers to a lot of artists is not only the royalties in perpetuity, which has had ebbs and flows, but it also allows artists an opportunity to collect or to connect with their collectors on a different level. You can really kind of watch where your artworks go from collector to collector to collector and continue to basically appreciate those collectors for being early adopters of your artwork or what have you. It also gives you an opportunity to have authentication of your artwork on the blockchain, but it also opens you up to a new kind of global set of eyes across the world where you've got this global network of individuals who are seeing your artwork for the first time. And, you get this kind of global currency through the cryptocurrency with which people can purchase your artworks through. So it's opened up a multitude of doors that I think has allowed a lot of artists to gain this newfound success that does not require you to participate or work with a gallery or an art fair or what have you. You can kind of become this independent source of selling your artwork and becoming successful independently. And that certainly has had its ebbs and flows. We've had our peaks and we've had our valleys in our market. But this democratization of artwork has really created an opportunity for people to become independent and sustainable with what their passions are.
Wow, I love that. And I have so many more questions for you, but I think this will be a good point in our conversation to also bring up Paul and have all of our speakers have a discussion and conversation about the state of NFTs and the art world. So in this section, we will answer some questions that we gathered from the community. And if this conversation inspires new questions, please drop them in our Discord general channel, and then we will answer them asynchronously.
Yeah, Paul, I'm really intrigued by fxhash. Actually, if I could do generative art via coding, I totally would. So if there's any, coders out there that want to do a generative art collaboration on fxhash with me, holler. But I also know that there's been a bit of a kind of a cult following on the Tez chain. I feel like I'm in several different kind of artist chats, and one of the things that people often talk about is collecting artwork on Tez through fxhash. And so I'm a little bit curious about kind of what the culture you guys have found on fxhash is like. Have you guys recognized you have a bit of a cult following there?
First of all, thank you. I think I was alluding to that a little bit in my previous answer. We at fxhash, we didn't start it. We more so picked up the torch of Hic Nunc, because Hic Nunc was, I think, founded in March of 21, and it really was the first time where artists could freely upload. They were freed of gas fees, and I think that was a really big thing in 2021. It kickstarted this global artist movement. People have been doing digital art or generative art essentially since computers have been around, and now they had the first time to actually sell them on. And I think that was sort of the first thing. Some people sometimes have said that Ethereum is sort of the New York, and then Tezos is sort of the Berlin, being this quirky and fun thing in that sense. And then we really just opened up the door for generative artists to have their own space, for them to interact, for them to collect, for them to talk with each other. And I think that was what really helped us initially, and still helps us, and sort of gave us that feeling that people associate with fxhash, that it was really artist first and it wasn't money first. So I think that was quite nice. And that's sort of the rationale behind all of this.
So I personally find coders to absolutely be artists, those who are able to produce the generative artwork. I think that, an artist can be anybody who's able to produce something that's visually or interactively or what have you intriguing, something that promotes dialogue or promotes reaction. But I'm curious if you've heard any kind of dialogue from people out in the ether about coders being artists. Are coders allowed to be artists? I mean, I obviously think so, but I'm curious what you've heard or what your thoughts are.
I mean, I think definitely. I mean, you can see like a lot of people, and especially developers, will probably also tell you that code is art on its own without sort of like having a aesthetic purpose. But especially in the context of generative art, as an artist, and I think nearly need to be a coder on a technical level, or at least be able to speak with a coder for you to like create the artwork with him. We've seen it that some of the best-selling artists on like within the generative art scene overall sort of like had an artistic upbringing, but then went into software engineering, and sort of like then through the rise of NFTs and through the rise of blockchain, sort of like combined the two of them, and are now one of the better artists around. I think this one, for example, William Mapan. He did exactly that. So like artistic upbringing, sort of like, so definitely to me, artists are coders.
I love that. I love that like philosophical question, because that's actually something we explored a little bit last week. We had this session about crypto and AI, and one of the folks we featured was Botto. So a DAO operator from Botto, and Botto is a autonomous artist, and it's governed by this DAO. And effectively, the question that Botto poses through its art is like, how is machine a creator, and like, what is the human social alignment that AI and automation can bring to this meaning making, right, through a community? Because ultimately, the machine itself doesn't necessarily have the ability to create meaning, but it's sort of what the narrative and the culture and the community around it that deems meaning and art.
Well, I think not only that, but I think, we're always going to see ebbs and flows in the way that people produce art dependent upon what their tools become. When was the surgence of sculpture? When was the surgence of painting? So many different things. When did we start utilizing items, objects in our artwork? Like, for example, one of my favorite art pieces actually has a spoon and syringes, because it's kind of a topic of addiction in the artwork. And so, I think continuously as we delve into new tools, new aspects where we can produce artwork, that's going to happen. And that's why I think, we have to be very open-minded when it comes to art, because it's not always going to be paint on a canvas.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, it leads into a really interesting question. And we've had sort of this question from the community as well, which is, as you think through the different trends of NFTs, so more broadly beyond generative art, it started with PFPs, and there's been different like eras, right? It was like limited collections, it was then like open editions. How do you think about the different eras of NFT art, and what are your predictions for the future trends?
I can't speak for the whole NFT market, but I can speak for sort of like the subsector that is generative art. I think what we're seeing there is that a lot of artists sort of like have really developed over the last 2 years, because some of them have been able to do it full time, which is great. Obviously, as a full-time artist, you sort of like develop and you start to think, okay, what can be the next big thing for me? And what we're seeing right now is that a lot of artists are now thinking about the physical side of the generative art. So either be that with plotting, which is essentially like robots drawing for you. There's also like oil plotting, which is like different like thing, which is like completely crazy if you think about it. So really sort of like pushing that envelope, some going into generative fashion, generative manufacturing. So like really trying to not only create digital artworks, but create physical goods, sort of like based on algorithms and based on digital generative art in that sense. And that is quite cool. But then you run into the problem again of not having enough wall space or needing a bigger house to put all of your art into. So a mix is needed.
And then I guess my answer is, I think dependent upon what we've seen in the ecosystem very much displays the signs of the times that we've been in. So I think, initially in 2021, we were in our PFP era, right? Like our 10,000 piece collection era. And then we kind of got into one-on-one artwork, and then one-on-one artwork really became popular, especially that high-priced artwork. And then I think a lot of us, like our financial markets kind of got a little bit rough, and we started to see artists go a little bit more so into open editions, where it was a little bit more self-protective, self-preserving, where you could sell your artwork without, kind of having that blow to your reputation, I guess you could say. And now we're kind of getting back into numbered editions. And like Paul said, I think probably what's heading up for us is a lot of people are going to want to start seeing physical items in association with those digital items or experiences or what have you. So I'm interested to see where it all goes, but watching how the ecosystem has ebbed and flowed and changed and peaked and valleyed has been very much, I think, a reflection of culturally or kind of economically what we've been facing as artists or what we've been experiencing and what works for us.
Amazing. And then I think one thing we touched upon was the concept of royalties being a portion of artist revenue. So obviously we've seen a collapse of royalties, and I wonder, from your perspective, Paul, how you've seen artists adapt to losing that source of income, and Sara, maybe some of the ways that you've adapted to this development.
I think there has to be a distinction made between sort of like royalties. I think royalties have sort of like within generative art, royalties at least sort of like still exist and are trying to getting honored by not all of the collectors, but by collectors really in it for the art's sake. They're getting honored. For collectors just trying to flip, for collectors that are using Blur in that sense, their royalties are obviously not getting honored, but on our marketplace they are. And the majority of sort of the transactions of new releases are with royalties. On Tezos, I think all of the ones are on royalties. On ETH, it gets slightly less. It sort of depends. Obviously, we are trying to sort of give that to the artist and allow them to make a living of that, because we think it is integral. I think our founder initially, he left for the first year, he left off royalties because he just didn't want to pay himself a salary, and that is really nice. So yeah, I think sort of within the generative art world, it's an uphill battle. We're trying our best to change the culture and explain to people why it is important. But ultimately, blockchain is a trusted system. If somebody does it and pays over the counter, we cannot force him to not do it. But we just try to educate through the social side of things.
And I feel like, the royalties in perpetuity were one of the greatest aspects of this digital art renaissance, right? This is what drew so many different artists in, was this opportunity to continue to have a sustainable source of living by this royalties in perpetuity in addition to your primary sales. And I think the loss of royalties, obviously not, across the board, but in many areas, led to a lot more primary sales, I guess you could say, but a lot of artists also figuring out a way to start selling, external to the Web3 space. So you saw a lot of artists starting to sell artwork on Canvas at markets. I know several of my artist friends, they got, part-time jobs or full-time jobs to make ends meet, which, you got to do what you got to do. There's no shame in that game for sure. But I do think that the kibosh on the royalties certainly was a big wake-up call for a lot of artists in this space. And a lot of people have had to figure out how to circumvent that and how to make it work within their lifestyles and what have you. But certainly, I think one of the big things was just the surge of continued primary artworks being sold. And I hope that eventually changes in the future, because like I said, I think this was one of the biggest aspects of this whole renaissance to begin with.
Yeah, this has been a great discussion so far. I have a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up the conversation. But one of the questions I have from students is, and I'll read this one verbatim. So I have been an artist and I've worked with mostly physical mediums like canvas, painting, etc. How do you transition from a traditional medium to digital mediums? And are there resources that you might recommend? And then I guess so that's probably more of a Sara question. And then beyond that, for Paul, do you see crossovers of artists attempting generative art after being a digital artist? And are there tools that help artists move that direction? So we'll start with Sara first.
Well, I'm going to listen intently into Paul's answer because I'm very intrigued in generative art. But, I was one of those artists. I was one of the artists that my primary mode of creating artwork was painting and or drawing or what have you. And I started exploring digital mediums utilizing Adobe Illustrator, utilizing Procreate and what have you to be able to create digital artwork. I've always been kind of not super like video focused or animation focused, but it's something that I started exploring because I recognize that one of the special things about Web3 is that opportunity to really showcase your digital artwork, your in motion artwork and what have you. And so for artists who are more of the traditional artists, I think my best word of advice is really to just continue to explore new mediums. It's going to be extremely frustrating because you're having to learn something brand new. However, there's a multitude of resources that are out there, whether they're for, courses that you have to pay for that you're learning about how to use Procreate or how to animate on Procreate, or courses that you might be learning about how to work with Adobe Illustrator or what have you. But certainly there are ways for you to explore digital artwork as opposed to your physical artworks. And also I would say don't get frustrated whenever you feel like your digital artwork doesn't look at all like your physical artwork, because that's very much the case for me. My digital art and my physical art look very, very different. And that's okay. I think depending upon what your tools are, it's totally acceptable for your artwork to change. I think oftentimes that kind of changes how our brains work and how our brains produce concepts. And so that would be my word of advice.
Thank you, Sarah. And so we're going to have Paul answer this last question about crossing over from digital to generative. And Paul, if you could also share a bit about how to explore on fxhash.
Sure. So I think indeed, like a lot of artists are trying to get into generative art. One reason being that I think that it's not even only for digital artists, but for artists in general. It's this search for randomness and this search for intuition, which normal art cannot really give you, because at times your code is doing something that you don't even know it will do. It's a bug, then it's a feature, then maybe this is the whole concept of the artwork. And I think this is what really intrigues artists, especially digital artists, as they understand that inherently. And then also once the generative art process gets more known within the traditional art world, also more traditional artists are getting intrigued by that. More often than not, artworks are already a series of work going around a topic. Now you can just add this randomness to it, for example. And I think that definitely is a thing. We try our best to also hold workshops globally, but also through our docs, get people to get started. There's some amazing YouTube series as well. So by Daniel Schiffman, for example, or everything the Processing Foundation has done, or P5JS are doing, that are really these rudimentary intro skills. I think anybody can learn how to code in that sense. And it's also not okay, I need to code a website, but you can code your little artwork, your little art piece. And I think that's quite beautiful. And especially for children trying to get into coding, it's quite nice as it's much more tangible to draw a red circle and then make that red circle beautiful rather than coding up a website.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for both of you for sharing your insights with us today. I'm going to wrap us up. But again, if you have any additional questions, please drop them in Discord and we will answer those asynchronously. And then as far as some of the resources Paul and Sarah talked about, we will share those out via our newsletter. Thank you for watching this workshop on the digital renaissance, and we wish you all a happy holidays. Bye, everyone.